Okay, so we're going to talk about the spinal cord. So this is chapter 14, and we're going to go over anatomy, the spinal nerves, and somatic reflexes. So general function of the spinal cord, big picture stuff, right? So what the idea is that we're going to transfer information from the peripheral nervous system, okay, so anything outside the brain and the spinal cord, to the central nervous system. So motor information and sensory information. So sensory information is going to come in, right? And motor information is going to leave. It's also where reflexes are integrated. So a reflex is the quickest reaction that we have to a stimulus. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but a reflex is something that you don't have to think about. So the spinal cord is about 18 inches long. So it starts at the base of the brain, and then it's going to continue on down to the L1 vertebrae. So it doesn't go all the way down to your coccyx, to the bottom of your back. It just goes down to L1. So here's a picture, right? So up here's the cerebellum. Right, and then we're going to start at the top, and then it goes about down to here. Okay, in the lab part, I tried to assign the anatomy of the spinal cord to you. So here's the basic idea. It's about the size maybe of your pinky finger, and it's going to be within the vertebrae. It's broken down into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts and the coccyx. So we'll talk about those. We can come back to this picture and kind of go over the anatomy of it. We'll come back to here in a minute. Okay, so basically it's a cylinder of nerve tissue, and it's in the vertebral canal. So it's surrounded by bone, so it's going to be protected. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, and they're broken into five regions. So cervical, which would be neck, thoracic is chest, lumbar is lower back, sacrum is kind of like the tailbone or your sit bones, what you actually sit on, and then the coccyx, which is the little tiny tailbone. So if we go back over here, okay, what you're going to see, okay, is that the nerves start above the vertebrae. So we have 8 cervical nerves, so C8, there's 1 through 8. The thoracic, we have 12. Lumbar, we'll have 5 nerves. Sacrum, there are actually 5 nerves. And then the coccyx, there's 1. Okay, and you can see they're numbered here. So 1 through 8, then through 12, then lumbar, sacrum, and then the coccyx is at the bottom. Okay, so the way that we name them is we just number them. So C1 through C8, so cervical nerve 1 and so on, and then T1 through 12 and so on, and then L and then S. Okay, they're mixed nerves. So mixed means they have motor and sensory information in them. Okay, so it's not like they just have sensory information or motor information. They contain both kinds of fibers. Okay, now these are special parts of the spinal cord. So in the neck, there is an enlargement, and it's called the cervical enlargement. Okay, and then in the lumbar region, there is an enlargement, which is called the lumbar enlargement. So it gets kind of wider in these enlargements. The conus medullaris is the bottom part of the spinal cord. So if you look at the spinal cord, it kind of goes like this. So it's a tube until you get to the very bottom, and at the bottom, it's a cone. So conus medullaris, so cone in the middle. So that's what this is called. The cauda equina actually stands for horsetail. The cauda equina looks kind of like a ponytail, right? So these are the nerves that are coming out of the bottom of the spinal cord. So that, and they're the nerves that can make up the cauda equina are L2 to S5. So those spinal nerves. So let's go back to the picture. Okay, so the conus medullaris, I think to me this is kind of hard to see, but it's right in here. Okay, so it's making a cone there. Okay, then the cauda equina are the nerves that are coming out from that. Okay, so if I do the pointer thing, it's all these nerves that are coming out of here. Let's see. The filum terminale is this terminal filament, and it's going to come down, and it actually anchors the spinal cord, so it's not flopping around down here in the vertebral column. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I hit everything right there with this picture. I think so. I think that's it. Okay. So we want to make sure we got that. Okay, now the meninges. So remember we went over meninges in the brain. Okay, so now we want to go over the meninges in the spinal cord. Okay, and they're a little bit different. So the meninges in the spinal cord, there's actually an epidural space. Okay, so we have the other order layers are the same. Okay, so dura mater, subdural, right? Arachnoid, subarachnoid, and pia mater. Okay, but outside of the dura mater is the epidural space. Okay, so let me see if I have a picture, right? So if we look here at this picture, okay, so this is the vertebrae, right? This is the part, this is your back. Okay, so when you feel bumps on the back of someone's spine, that's what these are. Okay, so these are the foramen or spinous process that are coming off of the vertebrae. Okay, so here, this is the front part. So this is going to be covered by the front of your body. Okay, so the spinal cord is protected in here. So here's fat, okay, and that fat is going to be in the epidural space. Okay, then if we work our way in, okay, we're going to have the dura mater, which is going to be like this dark blue, right? And then we'll have arachnoid matter, which is the light blue. And then we have the pia mater, which lays right on top of the spinal cord. Okay, the subarachnoid space is going to be underneath this light blue part. Okay, so if we do them in order, like I have here, right? So epidural space, then dura mater, okay, subdural space, arachnoid matter, subarachnoid space, where cerebral spinal fluid is going to be, and then the pia mater, which lays right on top of the spinal cord. So it's like a wrapper that's around it. There are lots of good pictures in your book that have this. Okay, so this is the spinal cord, right? Okay, and these are going to be the spinal nerves. Okay, so spinal nerves are right in here. Okay, and then we'll talk about all these parts. Okay, now the spinal cord, we don't want it floating around in this space. So it's attached with two ligaments that are actually called denticulate ligaments. And they kind of look like little teeth coming off. So let me try these little things right here. I don't know if that color's not very good. Let's see here. They're little white things in here. Those are the denticulate ligaments. And they're actually anchoring that spinal cord in there so it's not flopping around. So it's not moving. We want to keep it safe and protected. because without it, the information isn't going to get to the brain. Okay, so I think that's okay. The book, there are nice pictures in here in the textbook, and I don't have all of them in here just because there's so much information. This could be like really, really long. Okay. So here is a disorder, and this is a really extreme case of it. This is spina bifida. What happens is during pregnancy, the mom doesn't have enough folic acid. So folic acid is essential for cell division. So it's essential for cell division. So if a mom doesn't have it, the vertebral arch might not close, and the spinal cord and the cerebral spinal fluid aren't going to be enclosed in this bone, okay, if this vertebral arch doesn't close. So, and it can actually come out of the back. This is a pretty extreme case. So it does happen in one baby out of 1,000. So a lot of our food has folic acid added to it, or they suggest doing prenatal vitamins because it has more folic acid. But cereal has it, bread has it. So as long as there's enough in your diet, it's okay. But that's why they recommend taking prenatal vitamins before you get pregnant and during pregnancy. Okay, now in the spinal cord, okay, I want to show you the gray and the white matter. So I want you to remember that the white is what's myelinated, okay, and the gray are the cell bodies, dendrites, and the synaptic knobs of the axons. Okay, so some of it's going to be white and some of it's going to be gray. So if you cut through a spinal cord, what you see is this gray part is kind of like butterfly shaped. Okay, so you get this butterfly shaped gray. The gray matter, okay, what we call it when we name it is they name it horns. Okay, so there's going to be, this is the front, okay, and in the front there's a crack, and that's called the anterior median fissure. In the back, there is a smaller crack, and that is called the posterior median sulcus. So it's just kind of like a little groove. So the crack, the fissure in the middle is bigger than the sulcus in the back. Okay, now these horns, okay, are named. Okay, so towards the front, they're just called the anterior horns. Towards the sides, they're called the lateral horns. And towards the back, they're called the posterior horns. Where the two branches of the butterfly meet, okay, that's called, that's called the gray commissure. Okay, so commissures, they're meeting in the middle. Okay, now in the middle of the gray commissure, there's a hole, and that's called the central canal. Okay, and cerebral spinal fluid will flow through there. Okay, now the white matter is called furunculus. Furunculus, right? Great name. Okay, so there's going to be white anterior in the front, posterior in the back, and then lateral on the sides. And then there's a white commissure where it meets in the front, or where the white meets. Okay, so here is a transverse section of like a real life one down here. Okay, so you can see this is the gray, which it looks red. Okay, there's the gray commissure. Okay, there's a posterior horn. there's the lateral horn, there's the anterior horn. Okay, and then back here's the white, right? And the central canal is right here in the middle. All right, now I think we got all that. Okay, now here is how it's going to move, how the information is going to come into the spinal cord and how it's going to leave the spinal cord. Okay, so it's really important to know that sensory information is going to come in the back. Okay, so it comes in the posterior. So you kind of say, oh, it sneaks in the back door. Okay, then there might be an inner neuron which integrates the information. And then motor information is going to come out the front. Okay, so there's going to be stimulus, sensory, you're going to integrate it, decide what to do, and then the motor will come back out the front. Okay, so this is the front, right, or the anterior part. And this is the posterior, or the back. Okay, so what's going to happen is, let me try to find my pointer. The information is going to come in the back. So I want you to know that the posterior root, okay, where the information is coming in is sensory. Okay, the anterior root, where the information is coming out the front, is motor. Okay, so the parts right beside the spinal cord are called roots. Okay, so this where it's coming out is the anterior root, where it's going in is the posterior root. Okay, now there is this special little thing on the posterior root where the cell bodies are. Okay, so cell bodies are right there, and they call that the posterior root ganglion. So it's a knob. It's kind of like a bump. So look over here, you can see it better. All right, so what's going to happen is information is going to come from your body, and it could come from muscle, so somatic, so something that you're on the surface that you're aware of, or it could be visceral, so it could be deeper in your body, and it's going to come in, and all that information is going to come in the back part of the spinal cord, the back part of the spinal nerve, which is called the posterior root. Okay, that information gets integrated in here at this inner neuron. Okay, decisions made, some might be sent to your brain, some might be not sent to your brain. Okay, and then the effector, okay, or the motor is going to come out the front. Okay, and the motor information is going to come out the front. So it might be somatic, so it might have to go to a skeletal muscle, or it might be autonomic, where you're not going to think about it. Okay, so the back is sensory, the front is motor. There are places where that information is encased in one neuron, okay, and that is actually called the spinal nerve. So the spinal nerve is where it's mixed. Okay, now they have further mapped out all the parts of the spinal cord, so they know what is doing what. Okay, so if you look at it, somatic sensory is going to be in the back. Visceral sensory is more towards the middle. Autonomic motor is more towards the middle. And somatic motor is more towards the front. Okay, so these are where the receptors are taking the information and it's being sent into the back. Okay, and then sensory, and then motor information is coming out the front to make the change. Okay, now conduction pathways. So how does the information get up and down the spinal cord? Okay, so this is kind of jacked up, huh? So a pathway is made out of tracks and the nuclei. So basically what a pathway is, it's a series of neurons that it's going to take information and from the brain to the body, okay, or from the body to the brain. So it's not like one neuron is going to do the job. You don't have one neuron that's going to go from your brain to your toe. It's a series of neurons, and they've mapped those out. Okay, so sensory information is going to be ascending. Okay, so it's ascending up to the brain, and motor information is descending. It's going to come down from the brain. Okay, over 90% of the pathways in your body are going to decussate or cross. Okay, so that means that what's coming from the left side of your body is going to the right side of your brain and vice versa. So they're going to cross. So we're ipsilateral. We're not on the same side. Or wait, we're contralateral. Remember that from the beginning? Okay, tracks are paired. Okay, and usually the way it is, these pathways are 2 or 3 neurons that are going to work together. So it's not a lot, but it's a couple. Okay, now, different conduction pathways. So ascending, if something's going up, okay, it usually has a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary neuron. So there's a lot in the book about this and how it's going to travel. And I just want you guys to know the basics of it. Okay, so the primary neuron is going to be the first neuron. Okay, so if it's ascending, it's sensory. Okay, and this is actually in your book, it's on page 549. Let me see if I have it over here. Yeah, I have it written out, so we'll go over it like this. Okay, so when they name them, okay, they're going to name them from where they start to where they end. So if it starts at the spinal cord, it's probably going to end at the brain. Okay, so let me try to find a better example. So if we look spinocerebellar, okay. So it's starting in the spinal cord and it's ending in the cerebellum. Okay, now for descending, okay, instead of having primary, secondary, or tertiary, they call them upper and lower motor neurons. Okay, so for that, what they do is they're going to start with the brain, okay, and end with the spinal cord. So that's how you kind of tell where they're going. So this could be cerebellar, spinal, okay? Or like in the books, they have spinothalamic. Okay, so it's spinal cord, right? And it's going to the thalamus. All right, so sensory is going up. Motor is going to come back down. So let's go here. Okay, so somatosensory and viscerosensory. So we talked about those before. Okay, so somato means it's in the skin, the muscles, and the joints. Visceral means the information's coming from the viscera, so it's deep in the body. Okay, in this pathway, okay, the primary neuron, so the first one is, if you think about your cell body, or you think about your neuron, okay, here's the dendrites, right? And here's the cell body. And then here's the axon. Okay, so the dendrites are part of the receptor, and the cell bodies are actually part of the posterior root ganglion. And then the axon is going to go to the secondary neuron. Let's see if I have. The secondary neuron is part of the inner neuron. Okay, so the cell body for it is going to be in the posterior horn of the spinal cord, or it could go up to the brainstem. Okay, so then the axon for it will go to the thalamus so that you know what's going on, or to the cerebellum to try to figure out how we need to move. Okay, then the tertiary neuron is going to go, it's also considered an interneuron. Okay, so the cell body from it can start in the thalamus. Okay, and then it's going to go to the somatosensory area of your brain. I should say lobe. Okay, so you can figure out what's happening. Okay, so if we look at this sensory pathway, okay, so the primary neuron is starting out here. Okay, so primary neuron, so receptor for touch. Proprioception is how you're detecting where you're on space, pressure, vibration. Okay, so somebody's touching you. That information is going to come in the posterior part of the spinal cord, posterior root. Okay, and then it's going to go up. Okay, and it's going to synapse in the medulla oblongata. Okay, and then it's going to keep going up. Okay, and then it's going to synapse in the thalamus. Okay, then that information is going to go from the thalamus to this primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, and you're going to process that information in the back part of your brain. Okay, I am not super worried. Like, you don't have to know all of these names. Okay, I just want you to try to get the idea that, okay, the information's coming in. You're going to have to synapse. Okay, then it's going to keep going up. It's going to go to the thalamus where it's going to be interpreted, and then it's going to go to your brain where you go, oh, that's what that is. That's what's touching me. Okay, there's an ant on my arm or something like that. Okay, it crosses. Okay, so it's decussating, it's crossing. So it's coming in from whatever side this is. This, I guess, say this is the right side, right? It is the right side. Okay, it crosses, and then it's going to the left side of the brain. Okay, the different parts of the spinal cord, different information is going to come through. Okay, so this part, this medial lemniscal pathway, figures out where your arms are, okay, or if something's on your limb. Okay, anterolateral has to do with crude touch and pressure and pain and temperature, things that are going to make us, where you're going to have to figure out how to respond. Okay, if it's coming from the spine to the cerebellum, it's going to be body movement. Okay, and these are just examples. I don't expect you to memorize those, okay? But I want you to kind of understand the basics of how it's going to flow, how many neurons are involved. Okay, so to get the information up to your brain, it's going to take 3 neurons. Okay, so the receptors are going to the next to the inner neuron, and then the secondary neuron is going to go to maybe the thalamus, and then we're going to go from the thalamus to the cortex. Okay, there's 3 main pathways. There's 1, that's 2, and this should say 3. Okay, and they're in the book. I'm not going to ask you to trace those pathways. Okay, now descending information is going to only take 2 neurons. Okay, so there's an upper motor neuron and a lower motor neuron. Okay, so it's going to start at the cerebral cortex or the brainstem, and it's going to go down and it's going to synapse in the spinal cord, and then from there it's going to go to the muscle and it's going to say, okay, you need to move. Okay, now there are direct pathways and there are indirect pathways. So a direct pathway is voluntary movement where you're thinking about it, and indirect is things that we're not thinking about, things that are reflexes, like or can you stay upright? Can you stay balanced? Things for your posture. Okay, now this is from the book. Okay, so here's some ideas. So here's the sensory pathway. So here she is, she touches the hot pan. Okay, so the primary sensory neuron is going to take information. Let me try to find a, I don't know, we could do a highlighter. Maybe that'll be, nope, that's the eraser. Let me get the highlighter. Let's make it pink. Okay, so the information is going to, whoops, we don't want it that way. Kind of come up, right? And it's going to go, if I kind of pull this up, right? It's going to come in and it's going to go to the, to the spinal cord. Okay, then what will happen is we'll have a synapse, and that information is be the secondary neuron, and that's going to go to the thalamus. Okay, and then the tertiary neuron is going to go from the thalamus to the cortex. Okay, so I'm not too worried that you know what part of this spinal cord it's going through. I just want you to know that there are three things, okay, 3 neurons. So it's going to take that information to get up to your brain. Okay, now what's going to happen? The information is going to, for the motor side, it's going to come from the cerebral cortex, or it could come from the nucleus, depending on what you're thinking about. Okay, it's going to come down to an anterior horn, and then the lower motor neuron will take the information to your hand, and it'll pull your hand away. Okay, so this is in your book. So 3 neurons to get up, 2 neurons to get back out. All right, this we already went over in chapter 12. Okay, so don't worry about this. Don't worry about that. Okay, now let's talk about spinal nerves, okay, and distribution. Where are they? Okay, so 31 pairs, right? They start above the first vertebrae. So these are your vertebrae, okay, in your neck. And this is C1, which is the top one right before your skull. Okay, instead of where the nerves come out is they're going to come out above it. Okay, so even this is C1 vertebrae, C2 vertebrae, C3 vertebrae. The nerves are superior to it. So there'd be C1 nerve, C2 nerve, C3, C4, and they're coming off both sides. Okay, C1, C2, they're paired. Okay, now the proximal branches and the distal branches. So the proximal branches, the parts that are close to the spinal cord, are called roots. The parts that are farther away are called rami. Okay, so here is the picture. Okay, so let's try to explain this. Okay, so here's the spinal cord again. You guys see the gray matter and the white matter. Here's the vertebrae. Here's some muscle. Right, here's the back of the vertebrae. Okay, so if the part is close to the spinal cord, it's called a root. If it's close to the front, okay, it's the anterior root. And if it's at the back, it's the posterior root. The big knots are called the posterior root ganglia. Okay, so there's one on both sides. Okay, now the little part right here, that is actually the spinal nerve, and that's where it's mixed. Okay, so it has sensory and motor information. Okay, now part of the information is going to go to the front of your body. Okay, and part of the information is going to go to the back of your body. Okay, so we split here again. Okay, so let's show you. So this is going to the front of your body, and this is going to the back. Right now, the one that goes to the front is called the anterior ramus. It is thicker, because there's more of the front of your body. So there's more stuff to the front of your body. More, I don't know, more of your body to the front of it. Okay, and then here, see how the posterior ramus is smaller? If you think about where your spinal cord is in your back, there's actually very little of your body behind it, right? So because there's so little behind it, these can be small. Okay, now we haven't got to this yet, but there are branches that come off of this, and they're called rami communicanes. Okay, and that is going to hook up to this other thing called the sympathetic trunk ganglion, right? So, and those are paired as well. Okay, so that stuff is all kind of lab. I put labeling exercises in on Connect for this. Okay, now dermatomes. So dermatomes are related to your spinal nerves. So in general, what happens is the way that the spinal nerves come out. Let's go back here once. I don't want to make you sick. But let's find the picture of the whole thing. Okay, so the spinal nerves are coming out and they're extending from the spinal cord and they're going around the body. Okay, so what's going to happen? Sorry, I should have put a picture of it here. Okay, what happens is they actually innervate certain regions of skin. Okay, so a dermatome, here's the definition, right? Specific segment of skin supplied by a single spinal nerve. So this is one reason that we have visceral pain. Okay, so sometimes the spinal nerve might be going to a certain visceral organ like the gallbladder, but you experience the pain in a different kind of body part. Okay, or say somebody has a heart attack and they have pain going down their arm. Okay, so the pain going down the arm is because the heart and the arm are innervated by the same spinal nerve. So you don't have to memorize them, you just need to know that they exist. So gallbladder pain is the same kind of thing. Okay, shingles. Shingles is something cool. This is like a clinical view on here. Shingles is caused by the same organism that causes chickenpox. Okay, and it's a virus, and the virus is called varicella zoster. So once you get chickenpox, okay, the virus hangs out in the dorsal root ganglia, which we're calling posterior root ganglia. Okay, so it hangs out in there, and it's dormant. Okay, so it's in there. You can't get rid of it. Okay, so sometimes what happens as we age, okay, we start to lose some of the immunity that we develop, the antibodies that we have go down as we age. And if our immune system becomes compromised, this virus will kind of have a flare up. Okay, and when it flares up, it creates like a chickenpox like symptom or a rash and pain, and the pain travels along the spinal nerve. And there's a nice picture in the book, but you can see how it spreads along, the rash spreads along the dermatomes. So it spreads along where the spinal nerve is. So in order to treat it, they could give you an antiviral, or they could vaccinate. So that's what they recommend now, is just you get the chickenpox vaccination. Okay, now a nerve plexus. So I have this kind of written out here. So a plexus is a network of kind of braided or woven together anterior rami. Okay, so the front branches of the spinal nerves. Okay, and if you go to medical school or you become something beyond HCC, right, you will have to learn the branches of the spinal nerves. Okay, so if you look at this, okay, the off-white, okay, these are the cervical plexus. So this is in your neck. So all of these branches, so you can look at where these cervical nerves are coming out, and then they branch, and then they start to kind of intermingle. So I always kind of think of it as like they're braided together. Okay, now we have plexus in 4 regions of the spinal cord. So we have cervical, brachial, lumbar, and sacral. Okay, so no plexus in the thoracic area. Okay, so none in our chest. Okay, so the nerve plexi, in general, let's just kind of go over these. So cervical's in your neck, okay, and it actually has a phrenic nerve which goes to your diaphragm and controls your breathing. Brachial is your arm, your shoulder, and your neck. The lumbar is in the lower back. Okay, sacral's in the pelvis, and then the coccygeal is below that. Okay, and you don't have to memorize the nerves. Just know where, in general, where they are. Okay, now in the chest, okay, cervical nerves T1 to T2, those are actually intercostal nerves. Okay, they're going to lead to intercostal nerves. So they're going to be between your ribs. So instead of having to go to, if you think about your body, right? So here's your arms and your legs. Okay, so there's branches here, right? There's a whole bunch of branches going to your arm, right? But in your chest, they're just going out like this. Lumbar, they're going to your legs and your abdominal area. Isn't that a lovely picture? Okay, so intercostal, they're going out between, up to through your chest. Okay, now reflexes. Let's just talk about reflexes quickly here. So a reflex is a pre-programmed response to a stimulus. Okay, so you don't have to think about it. So they have to be stimulated. So something has to happen, and they're going to happen really fast, and they're going to be involuntary. Okay, so you can't control it in theory. Okay, so you shouldn't be able to control it. And they're programmed, they're hardwired into you. Okay, so somatic means body, right? So the reflex arc, so this, my little PowerPoint is screwed up. Here's the steps in the reflex arc. And I put this as a virtual lab on Connect for your lab exercise. Okay, so for a reflex arc, what's going to happen is we're going to have receptors in your body. Okay, and then the sensory information is going to come in. Okay, inner neurons are going to decide what to do with the information, and motor information is going to come out, and your skeletal muscles are going to respond. And all of this is going to happen before you can even think about it. Okay, so here is an example of a simple reflex. Okay, so here is a skeletal muscle. Okay, and they actually have spindles in them that can detect stretch. That's how we're going to figure out where we are in space. Okay, so the muscles detect stretch. Okay, and it's going to send information up through to the spinal nerve, right? And in the posterior root and in the back part of the spinal cord. Okay, there's going to be a synapse in here that's going to decide what to do. Okay, and then the motor information is going to come out, and it's going to say, oh, you need to flex your arm or move your arm. Okay, a stretch reflex is the idea that once a muscle is stretched, it's going to contract and it's going to keep its tone. Okay, so this is how we can maintain posture and equilibrium. So the example of what I have is when you start to, you fall asleep in class, right? And your head starts to tip forward. And then those muscles will be stretched, okay, and they contract, and you lift your head back up. So think about like a head nod. Okay, another example of a reflex arc is the patella reflex. So here's the idea. We're gonna hit the knee with the little hammer. The muscle's stretched, the muscle's fiber is, the muscle spindle stimulated. The information, the sensory information is gonna go to the spinal cord. Some information will go to the brain to say, oh, look, this is what we just hit with a hammer. And some of the information is just going to keep going out, okay? And the information that goes out is going to come in and it's going to come back out to the muscle and it's going to tell us to relax. Here's another picture and it's just showing someone stepping on glass. And withdraw reflex and the crossed over extensor reflex. So withdraw means we're going to stand up or we're going to lift our foot up off the glass, but we also have to tighten up the muscles in the other side of our body so we don't fall over. Oops, and that's the same picture because it always ends with the same picture twice. I don't know why it does that. All right.